Welcome to another Digital Anarchy tutorial. I'm Jim Tierney, president of Digital Anarchy, and in this tutorial we're going to go over the basics of Beauty Box Video 3.0. We're going to be using After Effects. Now we do have tutorials for the other host applications, but it works very similarly in all the host apps, so this is a good place to start. And actually we usually recommend you do the Beauty Box rendering in After Effects if possible, just because After Effects is the fastest to render of any of the host apps. Beauty Box works just fine in Final Cut Pro and Premiere and Assimilate Scratch, Avid, what have you. But if you compare the rendering times of all the host apps, After Effects is the clear winner, just because of the way it handles multiprocessing. So we do tend to recommend that you use After Effects if at all possible. But anyways, so I'm going to go through the basics of it. The first step is to select your video and click on the Effect menu. And go down to Digital Anarchy and select Beauty Box. And the first step that you're going to do is click on Analyze Frame. This is going to analyze the footage and figure out what the skin tones are and build an automatic mask for us. One of the big changes with Beauty Box Video 3.0 is that it uses a variety of algorithms to figure out what the skin tones are and to build that mask. In previous versions, it pretty much relied on face detection to figure out what the skin tones were. And so you really wanted to have the talent facing the camera if possible. With 3.0, that's no longer a requirement. It still does use face detection if possible, but it also uses a few other algorithms to determine what the skin tones are. And then once we figure out what the skin tones are, we can build that automatic mask and track those skin tones throughout the entire video clip. So all you need to do is set the mask up on one frame, usually the first frame, but it doesn't necessarily have to be, as you can see here. And as noted, the talent really no longer needs to be looking at the camera. They can be a side view, they can be 3/4, they can be whatever. You don't even need to have a face in the image for it to figure out what the skin tones are. So that's one of the big new features with 3.0 and really goes a long way to making the masking much, much better. So you can see here what our mask looks like with pretty much no work on our part. All we had to do was click the Analyze Frame button and it figured out what the skin tones were. And this is a great mask. We might potentially want to get rid of this gray up here, and we can do that by kind of switching into manual mode for a moment. We can select Add Color from the Mode pop-up menu. And what that's going to allow us to do is click on the image where we have some gray here. Click there. And what's going to happen is that's going to add that skin tone or the underlying skin tone to our color range and sort of expand the skin tone range and give us a better mask. And we can come down here to her neck and maybe add in some of those areas. And so that's going to give us a really good mask. We can now switch Show Mask to Off. And we can take a look at the before and after. Now you can see that she's got some skin damage down here on her cheek. And Beauty Box is doing a nice job of compensating that. But we are getting a little bit of softness on the rest of her face. And so we might want to dial down the smoothing settings. So we're going to go over here to the smoothing amount, set that to 20. We'll set the skin detail smoothing to 25. And we're going to take Contrast Enhance and crank that up to 100. Contrast Enhance is designed to sort of offset some of the softness that you're going to get with the smoothing. You may lose some contrast, as we do here when the smoothing is turned on. But with Contrast Enhance on, or cranked all the way up, it really helps bring some of that contrast back. So we can see the before and after again. And so it does a really nice job of just basically applying a little bit of digital makeup, making the skin damage less distracting, but not turning the rest of her face sort of plastic. Sort of strikes a nice balance of keeping the skin texture, but still smoothing out the rough edges. And one other thing I want to point out about the mask is that you can make further adjustments with the hue, saturation, and value ranges. In this case, we have a pretty good mask, and we don't really need to make much in the way of adjustments. But if you want a higher contrast matte, you can dial these down a little bit. Especially with masks that have a lot of gray areas in them, this can really help contain that. Or if you have a hair color that's very similar to the skin color. In this case, we do not, and those adjustments really did not help us out all that much. So we're going to undo them. But especially in cases where you have someone that's blonde, that blonde hair color may be very similar to the skin tone, and you may end up picking up more of the blonde than you really want. And so dialing these down will help with that situation. Now, one of the other big new features in 3.0 is the presets. You now get about 30 or 40 different presets that you can apply to give your footage different color effects, different styles, different looks. And we can select some of these and kind of show you some of the different looks. Now, these are just kind of easy ways of adding color treatments to the effect. In all cases, you can adjust the smoothing amount up or down. And of course, all the other parameters remain adjustable as well. So that's great if you don't have time to do color corrections and some other treatments, and you just want kind of a quick and dirty way of getting a very cool looking video. In this case, I'm going to turn it off, so we're going to set this to none and get us back to the original footage. And of course, we have our color correction controls down here. Now, these are pretty basic. If you're going to be doing hardcore color correcting, this is probably not the place to be doing it. But one of the really nice features about doing it in BeautyBox is you have the ability to use the mask. So the color corrections can be constrained just to the skin areas. So if you're just trying to make a very subtle adjustment just to the skin tones, turning on Use Mask and making the adjustments here can be a very good way of going. If you're trying to color correct the entire piece of footage, it's recommended that you use the color correction tools within your host application, as those are going to be a little bit more robust than the simple adjust hue, saturation, and brightness that we have here. But if you're just trying to warm the skin tone up or maybe cool it down a little bit, this is a very easy way of doing that type of color correction. And lastly, we have shine removal, which diminishes the shiny spots that you sometimes get from lights shining off of sweaty skin or oily skin. Sometimes it can create bright highlights, and shine removal will help reduce those. This can be a very handy feature if you have those types of highlights and just didn't notice them when you were shooting or just couldn't do anything about it on set. Now, one last thing I want to point out is the GPU checkbox down here. BeautyBox uses the GPU on your video card to accelerate the effect and really cut down on your rendering times, especially if you have a fast video card. However, After Effects also uses the GPU, as do many other effects. And so sometimes it can cause conflicts and either crashes or just odd rendering. And if that's the case, you want to turn Use GPU off. More often than not, that will solve about 90% of the problems that you're going to run into with BeautyBox. We've done a lot of work to make the GPU code as bug-free as possible. It's really essential for speeding up the effect. But every now and then it does cause problems. And this really tends to be a problem on AMD cards more so than NVIDIA cards, although you can have problems on NVIDIA as well. But we've noticed, especially on the Mac, AMD cards on the Mac tend to be much more problematic than anything else. And this has more to do with the driver that comes from Apple than the card or BeautyBox or After Effects or whatever. So we generally recommend NVIDIA cards if you can use them. And if not, AMD cards should work just fine. But just be aware that sometimes you can have issues, and Use GPU will more often than not solve that problem. And especially if you have an older video card, turning off used GPU is really the way to go because you're really not getting that much of a speed boost from some of the older cards, like the AMD 4000 series or the NVIDIA 9000 series. You're getting a little bit of a speed boost, but really not that much. So if you're running into any problems at all, just uncheck that. And so that's the basics of BeautyBox. Thanks for joining me. Hopefully you've found it informative. We have lots of other tutorials, free trial versions of the software, some free plugins, lots of good stuff on digitalanarchy.com. And I'm assuming you found our website because that's probably where you're watching this tutorial. But if not, digitalanarchy.com is a great place to go. And again, thanks for joining me, and I will see you in the next tutorial.